Hello and welcome to today's training industry webinar, Retain Your Top Talent by Strengthening Your High Potential Programs, sponsored by Infopro Learning. I'm Elizabeth Parker, Marketing and Event Manager here at Training Industry, and I'm very happy you could join us for today's webinar. Before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items to review that will help you interact with our speaker and get the most out of today's program. Throughout today's session, please feel free to chat your comments in the chat window and submit any questions you have for our speakers in the Q&A window, and we'll address them as possible towards the end of our program today. We also encourage you to share the information you receive with your colleagues and network on social media. Please include the handle Infopro Learning and the hashtag TI webinars so we're able to engage with you and track your contribution to the conversation. And when the program ends, you'll see that a short evaluation survey has popped open in your browser. We would greatly welcome your feedback about the content, speaker, anything else you might like to share. And as always, today's webinar will be recorded and available on demand at trainingindustry.com. And you'll receive a follow-up email from us with a link to the on-demand program that you can review again later or share with your team. If this is your first webinar with us, a special welcome goes out to you. At Training Industry, we offer near 100 webinars every year on subjects ranging from leadership development, data and measurement, soft skills training, skill gaps. We cover just about every topic relevant to leaders of training organizations around the globe. And if you have attended one of our programs in the past, thanks so much for being with us again. And now it is my pleasure to introduce you to your presenters today, Jim Caruso and Kathy Sherwood. Over the past 20 years, Jim has played an integral role in virtually every facet of workforce development, ranging from corporate training to instructional design and program direction. At Infopro Learning, he uses his diverse background to spearhead efforts to transform the way the company approaches organizational development through the blend of technology, people, and processes. Kathy Sherwood has over 30 years in the field of corporate training. She has worked with large organizations around the globe to create best-in-class leadership solutions. As the Vice President of Leadership and Organizational Development at Infopro Learning, Kathy leads the creation of new leadership programs that are designed to overcome the greatest challenges facing organizations. All right, and without any further ado, Jim and Kathy, I am going to turn things over to you.
Hi, everybody.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's great to be on this webinar with this topic. Both Kathy and I are with Infopro Learning, and just wanted to say a few things about our company. We are a human capital transformation company. We provide leadership and development. Is our slides moving yet, Elizabeth?
Not yet. Maybe click one more time on that slide. There it goes.
There we go. Okay. There we go. Okay, so we are a human capital transformation company. We've been involved with we offer leadership and employee professional development programs, such as high potential programs. We also work with a lot of content development where we're content agnostic. We do a lot in the managed learning service areas where we help out with L&D programs for end-to-end planning, whether that's delivering, facilitation, and measuring. We also get involved with instructor staffing and trainers. We have a broad network of 5,000 instructors that can speak in the native language speaking globally, and over 2,000 instructional designers. And also, we're practicing what we preach when it comes to technology with our learning management system, also applying artificial intelligence and chatbots, mobisodes, and simulations. So we're proud to be here and looking forward to this session. So let's start with a polling question. We'd like to know, when was the last time that you redesigned or significantly changed your high potential program?
All right, everyone, go ahead and take maybe about 5 more seconds to submit a response in our polling window. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay, here are your results.
Great. So we see a few will do this in 2020. Some have done it this year, and a couple in the last couple years, and some more than 3 years ago. And the biggest area, not since I've been here, we don't know what that means, how long they've been with the company, but it's been a while since many people have done these programs, and we're going to talk why it's very important. So some of the things that we'll cover in this webinar as we look at our agenda. Here we go. So we're going to cover, 5 major areas and questions to answer. Why are these HIPO programs, so important to companies now? What's changed? How are we going to attract and retain our future leaders? Also, defining who is and who is not a high potential. And are we getting the right people into our high potential programs? Also, how do you have a HIPO program be successful? What are the key characteristics and factors that make it work in this environment? And then finally, we'll talk about the skills for the future of work that are needed for HIPOs and all employees in this age of digital disruption and so forth. And we'll close with questions and answers. And as you know, you can put questions in the chat box, and there'll be time at the end. So let's talk about the objectives. Again, agile approach, getting the right companies now have to have an agile approach with respect to there's so much change and the rapid pace of change. We have to be flexible in retooling our programs to the skills that are needed now, as well as the skills that are needed in the future. We have to not just look at the current state, but looking out forward now. We're looking out many years, but also for those future skills, putting those to our programs today. But in 6 months from now, a year from now, there are new skills. So we have to be constantly scanning the environment. We also have to put these high potentials in a safe environment in the company culture where they can have opportunities to challenge, succeed, as well as fail and learn from those failures. And learning is not just a one-time event, it's a continuum. We learn over time, and there must be time to reflect. As always, in any training program, HIPO or not, executive sponsor is needed at the business leader level and the HR leaders. And with adult learning trends and learner trends, it's a shared ownership where the participant and employee needs to take responsibility. And also to develop a broad network in the organization. So now we're going to look at, why HIPO programs are important to companies now. And things haven't changed. A company still has its 3 major stakeholders, its owners or shareholders, its customers and employees. And there's a balanced scorecard to measure providing value to those stakeholders. That hasn't changed. Big picture thing, it's business acumen, there's leadership, and it's all about solving business problems. However, what's changed is VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Change is occurring quickly, and the pace of change is hard. From a change management perspective, you hear about change capacity. How much capacity do I have for more change in this pace of change? Am I resilient enough? So these are all the things in this culture and with this rapid pace of change, you need to have, be flexible, agile, and nimble. And also creating a supportive culture where you can learn by doing. On the next slide, we'll look at some of the facts that are bringing out this rapid pace of change. So when we ask the question, how often are you updating or redesigning your HIPO programs? This is the environment we're all dealing with. Nearly 1/5 of current employee skill sets will be irrelevant in 3 years. When we look at workforce planning, so, organizations that I've seen in the past, you have a 5-year time horizon. What are we going to need in 5 years from now? and thinking of those skills and ordering them out. But 40% of today's leadership roles will look dramatically different 5 years from now. You need much more of an agile way of scanning the environment and adapting and changing. So in this environment, there's a sea change for the role of leaders. And there's many companies that we speak with that they feel, just like people in the poll, that their current programs are not preparing their leaders to deal with this VUCA environment. So with our programs, we still have to we'll use the word traditional leadership skills, but also adding in those future of work skills to deal with this rapidly changing environment. Now let's talk about some reasons why a company, they need a HIPO program. There is, providing a transformational experience, the corporate culture, the high impact challenges for growth and failing. Of course, the financial results and providing value to all the stakeholders. With employees, that's attracting and retaining that talent, and so on. There's many reasons. So one way to go through this rapid pace of change and all the reasons for having it is to have a process. So this is one option of going through it, where you have a phased approach, a continuous approach, and a program might go over 12 to 18 months. But first you have to think how I link it to the business issues, the discovery and project shaping. I have to identify the right people, who should be in it, who should not be in it. What should we do for the rest of the employee population also? We have to create assessments and plan, kick off the program. And as you know, following the 70-20 rule, it's not just the face-to-face training, it's what occurs before it, after it, and the multiple face-to-face sessions. And at the end, we have to show HR and the business why this program was valuable. So now let's just look at some of the details for that first phase on discovery and project shaping. Again, as I mentioned, the business context is important here. You're going to also, look at the leader profiles, get input from the customers on that. We have to talk about that desired future state. Also, the whole program process we have to look at. And there has to be roles, responsibilities, and accountability, and also communications. One of the things we're going to mention is a very important point is who is a HIPO and who is not a HIPO. So that has to be properly communicated. So now we'll move to another polling question. And what percentage of formally identified or informally HIPOs leave the organization? So they've been formally identified you're a HIPO or informally told. What is the 2 percentages for that? What do you think?
All right, everyone, if you haven't done so already, go ahead and put in your response in that polling window, and we'll give you about 3 more seconds to do so. 3, 2, and 1.
All right, a lot of across the board here, and the actual number by research is answer C, or 14% for formally, and more than double if they're informally identified. And there's a couple of ways that we can look at this data and what it means. First, it shows the importance of formally identifying high potentials and the benefit, and also informally. But look at that low, percentage that leave. So it's important to do this. Also, look at the difference between the formal and informal, that big gap. So it's very important to identify those ones formally. And again, with this attrition rate, we have a current job, job market, and people, can easily move from place to place. So it's a very tough environment for that. Now, so identifying them is one way to attract and retain. Let's think about some other things that we can do. So we're dealing in an environment where the people are not, executives there don't believe they can retain their hypos, 7% according to McKinsey. And think about this current job market, unemployment. And the big hairy question here is, in this gig economy with workers, how will we get them benefits? Right now with this low unemployment, it's hard for some employees to get skills in the right areas. But what if now the gig and contract workers can easily move? So companies have to be constantly thinking, how do I retain those employees? They have to incent and customize them. They have to also, deal with VUCA, all that volatility, uncertainty, and so forth. And also companies are trying, small. We start areas with all this change in a small area, but also we start with our hypos, giving them projects and opportunities to succeed. And also we create a culture that if they do fail, they learn from that. So now we'll move into our next polling question, and we're going to talk about what percentage of hypos do you think do not belong?
All right, Jim, I am going to go ahead and close this poll out now. And here are your results.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Again, pretty, spread out. Some think of 20%. Actual, the number is 40%, according to Jack Zenger, formerly of Zenger Miller. And think about this: we have the data, but 40% do not belong. Think of the impact of that, and think of the future of HR. We've made a lot of progress with talent analytics or people analytics, whatever name you want to give it to it. But think about if we can get more of the right factors that are determining what's right for our company, who belongs in this pool, given the skills. It's not an easy task, but as an industry, we can all work to improve on that. So it's very important, we have to get it right, who should be a hypo and who should not be a hypo. So now I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Kathy Sherwood, and she'll tell us more about what makes someone a high potential. Kathy?
Thanks, Jim. What makes somebody a high potential, and why that's important is just what Jim just spoke about, is that we need to make sure that those people who are in our high potential programs are the right people. And how we do that? Let's take a look at the profile of a high potential. What is the profile of a high potential? And then we'll talk about how do we really assess that talent? What's good best practices about the assessment and identification process? And we think, based on the research and based on what we know, that this is really a critical piece. So let me talk about this model. This model from CEB, which is now purchased by Gardner, is common wisdom for identifying high potentials, and the devil is in the details in terms of how we do that. So every organization creates its own success criteria. These are 3, and we consider these foundational. So first is the ability or performance results year after year. So looking at that, but that does not make an excellent performer, does not make someone high potential. It has to do with their ambition or aspiration. And ambition, it usually expresses itself in a request even before they may be ready for the next level. And then the other foundational component is engagement. And we really want our clients to really look at engagement both within and external to the organization, because we always have to be really looking at what is the vision of what's going on in the marketplace. But there's more to this than the 3 foundational elements. We call them X factors. There's some research about this. I think it's an easy thing to remember, and I think it has to be customized to your business culture and not only your competencies, but what you're envisioning is going to be the future leader success criteria. It might include things like how do they synthesize data and are able to influence people in their presentation of that data. Very important criteria for success or X factor. Another thing might be a thirst for lifelong learning. You know those people when you see them, but are they really going after the learning environment, not just waiting for it to happen to them? And then another X factor, and we could go on, but these are just some examples, is the real ability to build teams that have the capacity, what we call the capacity for complexity. So it's building that curiosity, that ability, that empowerment of their teams. So those are three. Now let's look at a solid process for assessing those high potentials. As we said, we think this may be the key to the mint, is that when we're talking to our clients, is the assessment process, the identification process, we need to put some rigor around it. It doesn't have to be too extensive, but it needs to include a couple of key elements. Obviously, it would be some selection, assessments, and validated instruments. But we also like to see that coupled with custom simulation or role plays with trained observers who are looking for behavioral indications that the folks that are going to be placed into that talent pool are really ready and are behaving in a way that has the potential to go to that next level of leadership. So there's a whole process involved in creating, with that end in mind, the measurement for success and being able to do that in a platform. So we think the identification process is really important, and we want to also then take a look at go back to, okay, so we've identified it, but this is the process, but let's look at what is our real definition of a high potential. So let's look at that as well. So a high potential employee is somebody who is, and on average, we're finding, the research tells us that there's only 5% of our employees are really high potential considered if we do go through the identification process. So we want some rigor around it, but we want to really find the criteria that is not only right according to the research, but is right for your organization, because every organization has both a window to the future, which is going to be different, and a current state, which is going to be different. So that's where some of those X factors come in. But then we need to keep our eye on these high performers and these high potentials, and we need to keep them in sight. We need, what the research tells us, that we really need to let them know that they're high potential, and then come up with a leadership development program that is agile, that has some components that are standard, but is not cookie cutter, one size fits all. And we're going to share a little bit about that to be able to do it. To be able to share with you some of the things that we found that work for this and that may work for your organization. Before we do that, we're not going to ask you to poll this question. We're just going to ask you, have a little bit of fun with the next question, which is, we're going to say, so if we're going to put together a leadership development program, what's a critical best practice of a HIPO program? So we're not having you fill this in. Obviously, we know that when we have people go to a residential program and we bring a whole bunch of people in from multiple countries, and they tell us the food was great, but that's a good thing. We don't want the food to not be great, but obviously that's not a critical practice. So we just wanted to bring some levity into this, and then move into, let's look at how we really do, what makes a successful program. So this is now the devil. We've identified our talent pool. We've identified who is going to be in our high potential program, and then now what do we want to look at as to what a successful program is going to look like, and how do we design and deliver that? So that's the next portion of this. So the first part what we really believe in is creating a learning experience, and the high potentials, you've identified them, but before they go through, usually it's a 6, 12-month, it could even be a 2-year program, a cohort program, which has various elements. There really needs to be a big and exciting kickoff event, and it'll be both some things that people will do on their own. You may involve a coach, but it's usually also an event with some, as we said before, some of the criteria, the executive sponsorship. It's an inclusive event, and it brings people together, this cohort together, to be able to have some interactive sessions. But then the uniqueness of this is we want them to be able to create a development plan. So while they're going through their 9 to 12-month learning journey, which is going to be the 70-20-10 rule, they will have a leadership development plan that is right for them, both right organizationally, where you want leaders to go in general, but also every person in this program is going to have some strengths that we want to build on, and they may have some areas that we know they need to develop to be successful for the next level. So that's what this first learning experience, really the outcome of it, is to have this customized leadership development plan for these individuals. Then let's go back and look at the best practices of this high potential program, include this strategic alignment. And when we're talking about the strategic alignment, the most critical thing that we're passionate about and that we really are evangelizing to all of you on this webinar is we need to be very, very conscious of the business context, because for the leaders for your high potentials to really want to stay with you, they have to feel that they are really being molded to be leaders for your specific business and the business context, both now and in the future. We have to have executive sponsors that are not just there by name only, but are really authentic and engaged in really helping out and being involved. And if we can have that happen, it makes a whole bunch of sense. And then in terms of the inclusivity, we're spending our time talking about identifying and notifying high potentials, but we also have people, most of the people, leaders, we want the message to go out that they are also important to us, whether they're going to the next level or not. We're going to expand them horizontally, that they're going to expand their capabilities within their job, and they're going to have a lot of opportunity to do that, and give them some clear criteria of how, if they do want to be engaged and are ambitious, how they might get there. So we don't want to turn off those people that are not in high potential programs. We want to provide lots of opportunities for them to do that as well. So now let's look at some of the other key criteria of what makes a successful high potential leadership development program. So what Jim has talked about is VUCA on steroids, which we know about this digital disruption, how our business is changing every step of the way. And I believe that, and we believe at Infopro in our leadership practice, and this is what we are completely passionate about, is that we have to change both the mindset of which is the belief system, because our mental models really of what a good leader is not consistent with what the needs are of the future. And we do have a behavioral component to our leadership development perspective and point of view, but what we include in there is not just what leadership behaviors people need to step up or adopt, but we also, there might be some things that people need to give up in this world that we're living in now. It's a bit different. And so when they're developing their teams and they're developing the business for the future, they need to do other things. We also have to look at organizational processes. So our multifaceted leadership program really consists of the learning from experience, learning from others, formal and informal learning, and we'll show you a sample of what one program might look like. But it really, the great preponderance of work in these high potential programs goes from both the self-reflection, learning from experience and getting some feedback, getting some coaching, and also taking on some project work and being a role model for other folks in different pockets of the organization, whether it be functionally specific, country specific, or rotational assignment, and then formal and informal learning. Plenty of opportunity to apply, and lots of opportunity for peer learning circles as well as coaching. And then there's to retain them, we really need to act on the feedback and let people make mistakes and learn from them, and be able to do that in a safe environment, and so that when they take on more leadership responsibility, their visibility in leadership and in the company will be that much more successful. So if we look now at a sample of what a program might look like, and this has a lot of information on it, I know, but we wanted you to get the sense of the movement of, we talked already about the kickoff event that we think is really critical even before the program begins, and then there'll be activities for learning from experience, learning from others, and formal learning. But this is an agile program. It probably would not be the same next year that it is this year, because you would want to change this to adapt to the changing marketplace conditions, and we're seeing this going on to make sure that both in your formal learning and certainly your project work that you're having people go through is very agile and gives you a lot more flexibility. The next pieces of this is really just sort of summarizing if we move on, and let's move on to the next slide, which is really looking at the parameters for success. So this is really, we are putting this at the end of the presentation. Well, what we encourage you to do is, when you're really envisioning strategically what this HIPO program really looks like, we really always encourage in that project discovery period, in the shaping period, we encourage you to look with the end in mind and really look at how are we going to measure the success of this. So we can come up with some creative success measures, and we can brainstorm lots of criteria, some of which are on here, but certainly we need to be creative, and we need to look at the teams, we look at engagement, we look at external factors as well. If we have a lot of client-facing professionals and leaders, that we really need to be able to get some feedback also from clients. The next slide really talks about best practices and kind of summarizes almost everything that we've just talked about these high potential programs, and really looking at projects, focusing on potential, looking at a holistic process, making sure we have metrics. And we didn't talk a lot about it, but communication throughout this program and finding agile ways of communicating to people through technology today is really critical. And then going on to the next part of the ROI gives you a little bit more detail. We can go to the next slide. And the HIPO program, really looking at pre and post program assessments in the aggregate, and doing some rigor around this, not only for you to have a great program, which is what we hope you already do, and this you could maybe make some tweaks to make it better, or you can move on. It's to really drive and continuously learn from your participants and from the leaders and from your organizational leaders and your key stakeholders, how you can always improve and evolve this program, because it is going to be different 2 years from now. It no longer can we have a static program that's going to exist for 10 years, because so much is changing. So we need to make tweaks to it, but we can have a framework that really works and measurement processes that work. So at this point, I think that we want to get some feedback and really just talking with you about then how, when we are designing this program, and hopefully this has given, what Jim and I have spoken about was given you some ideas for your program and what you're currently doing, and maybe some tweaks or some improvements or some rethinking of it. But how are we going to get people prepared for the future? And then we wanted to end our presentation with a little bit of conversation about the future of work and how it's changing. And we've been talking about it in general terms, but Jim's going to really drive that point home in the last part of this presentation. Jim?
Yes, thank you, Kathy. So let us move on to our next question. And we've been talking about these skills. Let's see, to deal with this VUCA environment, how many of your programs actually include these skills that are needed for the future of work?
All right, everyone, take just a few more seconds with this polling window open. We'll give you maybe 3 more seconds to put in your responses. 3, 2, and 1.
So again, the mix here is that some are doing it. That's great. Some are not doing it, and I'm assuming they're going to be planning on doing it going forward for the folks who said 2020 or beyond that. And some don't know, and that could mean a couple of things. But exactly what are these skills? So let's talk about what these skills are in this environment. So with this pace of change that's going on, the reskilling needs are happening so fast. We have, as I mentioned earlier, we're looking now at the future and putting those skills in, but then in the future, 6 months to a year from now, it's going to change so quick. We have to constantly be scanning the environment, getting feedback and input. So there's many things we've heard, we talk about this VUCA environment, we've talked about disruptive technologies, and I have a lot, that I can say about that. We still have to help the organization to achieve its business objectives. So I like to look at a lot of these skills as interrelated. Obviously, these are skills that have been there in the past, but they're becoming more important. As you look at all these skills, the laundry list of skills that are out there, some become more important for, globally for any company, and then some obviously regarding their strategy are more important to a company's strategy. However, what we're finding in a lot of research that's out there, and there's tons of lists that describe these skills, but I like to say they're all interrelated because you have to be thinking, the innovative folks, and being creative. But the thinking process, you have to look at critical thinking, why are things happening, the analytical part, and we have a lot with analytics to help us. Systems thinking, seeing the whole total enterprise. These are all very important, but it's all about the problems we have today are more complex. There's both structured data we're getting, and there's both unstructured data. How do we solve these problems? There's a lot to be able to think like that. Ideation, creating the ideas for the future, and we're always making decisions. We have so much more data. Let's use that data to make the right decision given the context. So as we look at these, skills, there's tons of lists out there. This one, is just showing the, today where the skills are, what's trending, and then what's declining. So again, in the middle, what's trending for 2022 is the analytical thinking and innovation, creativity, the things that, I put on the prior page. But another important thing to remember, it's not just, the technical skills. There's a key distinction. Managers don't necessarily have to have the technical skills, but they have to understand technology and what the power of technology can do. So when you look at all of this, I mentioned those skills, the interrelated, you still have the human or people skills or behavioral skills. We want to, can get away from the use of soft skills. I'll show you on the next slide, this research that just came out this week. But people have to be able to adapt. Think about what's happened with teams. We always had, people in the office located, in the same place and working as a team. And then we went to more virtual teams. We had to adapt for that. Workers co-located, dealing with time zones across the globe. And then we're adding on to that, obviously, diversity and inclusion. So we're able to adapt to these changes. It's just that this environment There's the number of changes are coming, and they're coming at us very fast. So some of the research that I've done regarding this and all these critical thinking and decision making, it really comes down to judgment, and you want to develop people's ability to use their judgment. And one way in instructional methodologies, there's many assessments, types of assessments when we put people through a HIPO program. There's also business simulations, because they create an opportunity of a real life environment to go through several rounds of making decisions, whether they're how a business works or a managerial leadership simulation. But it creates an environment where you can use the Socratic method. Why did that happen? What's going on? What's the implications of that? And it's a very good tool to develop that. And think about the context. So talk about technology. In my opinion, we know change has always been there. Getting business results has always been there. We've always looked at, I started my career in accounting. We always had descriptive analytics. And from an accountant, you looked at financial statement analysis and what were the changes from period over period, what went up and what went down by why. That's still there. But the tools to help us make these decisions with big data, artificial intelligence, and analytics, it gives that data and enables us to sort it and process it and communicate it to make that better decision. Why things are happening. So it's not only what happened as a descriptive analytic, it's also why it happened. The diagnostic analytics is the key skill in developing the critical thinking. And you take all of this data, and then you help to create the predictive analytics. What will the future look like? We've always done forecasting, but now we have better tools to grab this data to make more precise forecasting, more accurate forecasting. So we have all this data, more data to make a better business decision. Now, as I mentioned on the next slide, there is some, recent research. We talk about all of these skills, and our major, theme about this is you still need those traditional skills, but you need these new skills, and you need to be able to adapt quickly. So, and this article from IBM, and it's also published by, Josh Bersin this week referring to it. It's all about, get away from using soft skills. It's the behavioral skills. And depending on what level employee you're looking at, we're talking about technical skills. They can learn the programming skills in college, but it's the ability to interpret that data for managers through non-technical to work with the technical managers and share that information. So, and as I mentioned earlier, think about how we're getting, just in the area of high potential and the possibility for HR analytics and talent analytics. We've got this fast environment going on. If we can determine the skills our company needs now and in the future and do this quickly, we'll be able to improve our percentage of formally identifying the right HIPOs, as well as informally identifying them, and importantly also, putting people who should not be HIPOs into our program. And just to look at some of the skills that you could be putting out there for your HIPO programs at the various level, whether it's becoming a new manager or the mid-manager level or moving to the senior executive level, there's a mix of various skills that you need, and we put them into 5 major categories here about the part with the self-reflection for personal growth, emotional intelligence, the learning agility to be able to learn in this environment. And in these 9 to 12 month HIPO programs, you have a lot of time for that self-reflection with or without a coach and other supports and managers to go through that process. Of course, it's always about, execution, the leadership, the strategy, those types of things. But now we're moving into a skill in the middle box. These skills have been here, but these are skills that help with complexity. We talked about change, capacity. How can you develop these skills? And the environment here, that I've been put into, Infopro, my change capacity is like at the top, but I'm in a very supportive environment and culture where I'm able to get through this and take on more challenges and deal with it and be more productive. So organizations can do this, for their talent. In the fourth column, we get to the disruptive technologies. Some of the skills I mentioned, the critical thinking, the data-driven decision making. It's not necessarily knowing what the technology is, as in column 5, but how to use that technology to make better decisions. What's the power of it? How much data can it give to me to do this? And then in column 5, we have the digital literacy, the AI, all the things where you need programmers and people need to be able to work with that. I'll never forget when I was teaching an analytics course to students, and one of the students' impression was, I just want the technology to show me the answer. And that's where we have to move away. It's not going to just, technology is not going to show you the answer. You still need those critical thinking skills, decision making, and so forth to make better decisions. So we'd like to thank you for your time. We really appreciate this opportunity. And we're going to open it up for questions and answers. I know we've got 2 questions in the chat. I don't know what else you might have, Elizabeth, but we can start with the ones in the Q&A column.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jim. And Kathy, great session. Everyone else, if you have questions, now's your opportunity to ask those. If you find your Q&A icon in your Zoom toolbar, you can start typing in those questions now. So this first question is from Melody, and she says, what about individuals that see themselves as a high potential because it's the next obvious thing on their career track? They think they have the ambition and they make the request, but really they're just not a great fit. So what advice do you have for navigating a situation like this?
Kathy, if you could take this one, and I'll take the next one.
Sure. I'm afraid I might have some audio interference, so if you have trouble hearing me, let me know. Unexpected noise outside my home. So this is the navigation of change that we all have to go through, right? So let me know if that noise is interrupting. But what I would say is that one of the things that a lot of organizations are doing for just the person you're describing is to make sure that you have in place leadership development opportunities for people who are expanding their role within their current role and may not be necessarily going to the next level, because you know that organizations are matrixed and there's a lot fewer layers. So there are fewer opportunities for people to move ahead, but we need to make those roles and that leadership development to expand within a role more appealing. And that's both a communication message and a role definition, an organizational design, that will help retain those people, because we very often need those people that might not necessarily be the right step. So it's navigating sometimes their egos, and sometimes making sure that they feel valued in the organization and that we give them some good opportunities to grow.
Excellent. Thanks, Kathy. All right, this next question is from Deidre, and she says, in the context of our VUCA world and the importance of agility as a core skill, what is your opinion on including agility as one of the criteria for HIPO along with aspiration, ability, and engagement?
That's a very good point. We look at all these, these different skills. When I see this question, yes, agility is needed, and it can become from any, style, personal style, communication, and so forth. We have to build our resilience. We have to increase our capacity to change. So I look at that at a global level. It also makes me think when we come to communication styles. Our organization just went through putting our senior team through, the DISC profile, communication styles. And many companies use that. And there are people that are more, faster pace versus slower pace. So together as a team, we have to work at that. So it might, be harder for someone who does not like change, but that's a stretch area and a growth they're going to have. So in my opinion, agility is needed. It should be there, and there should be ways to support and develop people to get that skill.
Perfect. Thanks, Jim. Lots of great questions coming in here in our chat window. This one came from Vanessa. She says, should we inform a high potential that we see them as high potential? And what is your recommendation to communicate it, if so?
Kathy, I can start off, and I can then.
No, I could take that, because I think that goes to the percentages that one of the polling questions, that we do know that if people are told, that they're less likely to leave. So it is, as we discussed in the first part of the question, it to make that transparent to the organization, what the criteria is and who is involved in those HIPO programs, I think is important. But navigating, because it's going to be a small percentage of your population, so you want to make sure you have good messaging for those that are not in your HIPO program as well. But the research tells us it is a good idea. Many companies feel a little bit uneasy about it, probably for all the reasons we know. But the research tells us you'll have a better chance at retaining those high potentials if you are communicating openly.
Perfect. Thanks, Kathy. Okay, this question came from Wes, and he's talking about major companies with board members, and wants to know, do you think that, the average board member of a big company, are they on board with the HIPO and the succession planning? Are they in support of this?
From what I've, seen with various, clients and companies, through the years, HR, you talk about the role of HR, and HR, from the 80s and 90s having a seat at the table. Now they're being, put at the table. But the question is, are they an equal player at the table? Are they speaking up? Are they being proactive and asking the right questions? So from an HR perspective, it's a bigger opportunity to show their value of what all this data and analytics can come out and help improve our business results. So some, generally some companies are doing this, some are not. It could go by industry, it could go by the person, but the important thing is for HR and the results, if they can promise what the benefits are of doing this. So we talked about, as we know, people on the board are looking at those major business issues, major financial issues. All the various types of metrics in the balanced scorecard, improving them, whether it's productivity, efficiency, top line revenue, bottom line profit. But, think about the HIPOs that are leaving, or if we can improve that, we're keeping our talent, especially with this environment, with this low unemployment, to keep these people on board. So there are some companies in tune to it, and some, have a way to go. Because we look at the boards, but we also look at the companies we talk about, are they including these skills in their HIPO programs? So those companies are not even there yet, and it might not be at the board level.
Awesome. And along kind of similar lines, Diane asks, what advice do you have for gaining executive buy-in for developing a HIPO program?
Well, Jim, I can take that. I think one of the things is that we said in the initial stages is coming up with some metrics, and not just metrics that that impact the business, and that may include retention. It also may include employee engagement. It might include client engagement, customer innovation, if that's an important metric for you. And also your succession planning, because many companies are seeing that there's a lot of people in the baby boomer generation that are 10,000 or more retiring every day. So that being able to see that workforce, that leadership pipeline and the need for it, and the building an urgency about that. So I think it takes some analytic work, so that it impacts the lack of having a high potential program will adversely demonstrate how it will adversely impact the business if we don't do it. So I think that's the best way to get their attention and get their sponsorship.
Great, thanks, Kathy. Okay, I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions today. This one comes from Wes, and he says, the average 360 feedback includes 38 competencies that are being measured. How likely can anyone score high on all of these? And how do we use this more effectively in helping our HIPOs as they can't work on 38 different things?
So Wes, you mean they can work on about 100, not 38, right? So you hit the nail on the head, and let's put this into perspective. When we look at competencies, we look at leadership competencies, we look at employee competencies, we also look at functional competencies. When I've conducted 360-degree feedback with all these levels, this is the laundry list of many things to work on. So there's a couple of ways to look at it. What's the most important for a leader? What's most important for an employee? Also, some of those 38 competencies might come into broad categories. So, and when you get 360 feedback, you're looking for the blind spot. Where did I rate myself high and others scored me lower, whether they're peers, internal customers, managers, or subordinates. So as you go through your 360-degree feedback, you're looking for a nugget of truth. What can I work on? And getting focusing on 2 to 3 of those broad categories, focus on one of those 38 individual statements and the issue that's coming out there, having a conversation with your manager, which is the most important. So, we all know those 38 are right. Which is the key is to get focus. Which one does my organization need? Which one does my function need? Which one do I need? And one thing I'd like to add about the HIPO programs, and this is such a limited number of people can go through this. One of the companies that we have talked to recently, they can only put 150 through their HIPO programs. So Kathy talked about inclusivity. What these companies are doing, they're taking these broad leadership competencies and they're making sure they're learning and development for that other population. So whether it's the informally identified or not identified, what can I do to improve on these skills so that makes the organization better? And to think of those skills, if you've got the skills for the future of work in your leadership programs, how powerful could it be if you broaden those skills with the rest of the organization that can't participate in those HIPO programs?
All right, maybe one more question here before we close out for the day. This is from Gulsa, who says, what do you think about potential-oriented interviews? Is it possible to define a HIPO just with an interview?
I think it would be limited. I think it's one perspective. Even if you had multiple interviewers, you're then probably asking hypothetical questions rather than behavioral examples from the past. So it would have to be carefully thought through questions that would be indicators of future potential. So I think, again, the devil would be in the details of this, and I would encourage at least 1 or 2 other means of where we're a big believer of, role plays with observers or some kind of a simulation, some other way of being able to determine potential, because I think it would be tricky because you've got the human factor. So that's might be wise to think about more than one area, but probably with some very good, thoughtful behavioral examples that were linked to potential with a group of people that could validate those. Might take a little bit of time, but we might be able to come up with something that could be a good indicator, but I would love to see something else added.
Great. All right. Thanks so much, Kathy and Jim, for being with us today, for answering all of these questions and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you. Enjoyed it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. It was very enjoyable, and good luck with your HIPO programs and leadership development.
All right, everyone, in closing, I would like to invite you all to join us for some upcoming training industry webinars. You can find out what's next, register for an event, or watch past webinars now at trainingindustry.com. And as a reminder, our webinars are pre-qualified for a credit hour by SHRM, ISPI, and CPTM. CPTM is a certified professional and training management program that assists you in developing core competencies that will empower you to manage the future training needs of your organization. You can participate in a number of practicums held within the U.S. or join a virtual practicum from anywhere in the world. Find out more at trainingindustry.com/CPTM. And I would love to see you all back here next Thursday, the 19th, for our TICE virtual conference. This 4-hour event will explore the various factors to consider when developing an L&D plan for your organization. Register for free at trainingindustry.com/TICE virtual. Once again, thanks so much, Jim and Kathy, for being with us today. And of course, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Infopro Learning. Thanks to all of you for your time and attention. Until next time, I'm Elizabeth Parker. I hope you all have a great day.